Are you looking for an earwire to complement your minimalist earring designs? These modern big loop earwires are the perfect finishing touch for your handmade earrings. Leave them unadorned for an elegant minimalist look, embellish them with beaded dangles, or even beaded fringe for a bolder, more graphic statement. My name is Wendy, and I'm the wire weaver behind Door 44. If you want to learn to make wire jewelry, this channel's for you. So these are the ear wires that we're going to be making today. This is sort of a really popular shape right now. You can wear these alone just like this. You can add beaded dangles. You can add beaded fringe if you wanted to do some bead weaving on these. And brass is really having a moment in fashion and in home decor. Now, I'm not normally a fan of yellow metals, but I decided to go ahead and use brass because I am kind of liking these new sort of modern, bold, graphic jewelry designs that we're seeing using brass. You can make your loop virtually any size. I made 3 different sizes here. This is a 6mm loop, an 8mm loop, and a 9mm loop. And those are just the 3 largest steps on my step bill making pliers. So let's go ahead and get started. So the wire that I'm using is a red brass. This is from Rio Grande. And this is 20 gauge dead soft. Now, the thing about brass wire, if you're used to working with copper, brass is harder than copper wire. It has a very different feel. Even though it's dead soft wire, it's going to feel quite a bit different than copper. But it's good to get a feel for working with different types of wire. So I thought I'd go ahead and make something with brass. That's a little bit of a change from my normal copper that I use on almost everything. It's just kind of fun to experiment with something different. So this is what we're going to use today. You can also get brass wire from Creating Uncommon on Etsy. This is becoming one of my favorite sources for wire. They have a really great selection. They have these nice small spools, so you don't have to buy a huge amount of wire. You can also buy quarter-pound spools from Rio Grande, so you don't have to buy the big bulk 1-pound spools if you don't want to. So either of these 2 options work great, and I will provide links in the description for both options. These ear wires are going to be super quick and easy to make. You're going to need 4 inches of 20 gauge wire per ear wire, so 8 inches total. I'm going to go ahead and cut 2 pieces here that are 4 inches long, and I'm just straightening this wire with my fingers at this point. You can use your nylon jaw pliers if you like, but we're gonna do some more straightening here in a moment, so it's not super critical at this point. Again, I'm gonna go ahead and make sure I have 2 4-inch lengths. And then I want to mark these wires at the center. So we're gonna mark them at 2 inches. And again, don't have to be absolutely perfect here. We're gonna trim these to length here in just a moment. But go ahead and mark them at the midpoint, because that's where we're going to start the bend for our loops. And this 4-inch length is long enough that you can make any of the 3 sizes that I showed you earlier. Today I'm going to go ahead and make the mid-size loops. We'll do the 8mm step on our pliers. So you can do 6, 8, or 9. And like I say, this 4-inch length is long enough to do any one of those sizes. So pick the one that you like best and make that. And of course, you can also make these larger or smaller. You can make any size loop that you like. If you go larger, just add a little bit of extra wire length. And if you go smaller, you won't need. You can even shorten the length if you like. So before I do anything else here, I'm going to create a slight bend right there at that center mark. So I'm going to grip with my pliers right at that mark and just give them a slight bend. Now that we have our bend, we're going to go ahead and start making our loop. So I'm going to grip between the 8 and 9mm steps on my pliers. And again, I'm making the 8mm size right now. So I'm going to wrap that wire around the 8mm step and adjust your pliers as needed to get that tail all the way around your wire, so you end up with a loop that looks like that. We're going to repeat that on the other ear wire. Again, wrap it tightly around that 8mm step and adjust your pliers as necessary until you get your loop all the way around. The next thing we're going to do is grip with our nylon jaw pliers, because I don't want to mar that wire. And I'm just going to hold on nice and tight, and then I'm going to wrap that tail snugly twice around the center core. Now, the thing about brass wire that you're going to find is because it's harder, it doesn't want to bend quite as easily as copper will. So you're going to find it a little more difficult to get nice tight wraps with your fingers. So just wrap as tightly as you can. I'm going to go ahead and repeat that on this second wire. But as you look at these from the top, can you see how loose those wraps are? And this is true on both of these. This is because brass is just a harder wire. It doesn't want to bend as easily as copper will. So it's a little bit more challenging to get nice, clean, tight wraps. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and trim those tails first. So I'm just going to get in there with my wire cutters, and I'm going to get up as close as I can to the wraps and trim that tail off. Repeat that on my second ear wire. Again, I'm getting up nice. The flush side of my cutter is up tight against that bottom wrap. Go ahead and trim that off. And now I'm going to use my chain nose pliers, and I'm going to get in there and just tighten up those wraps a little bit. Get them nice and snug up against that center core wire. Now with copper wire, typically all we'd have to do is just tuck in the tail end of our trimmed piece. But you see the difference there? See how much tighter this wrap is compared to this one? Again, this is just compensating for the harder brass wire. It's just not as soft, so it doesn't want to shape as easily. So again, we're going to get in there with our chain nose pliers and snug up those wraps gently. You don't want to mark your wire, but get them nice and tight and clean. And that gives us our loops. Now the next thing we want to do is go ahead and harden the wire. Now, again, if you don't want to change the shape of your wire, if you want to keep it round and you really like that look, then you will go ahead and use a soft mallet at this point, something like this. I, however, prefer to flatten my wire just a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and use my chasing hammer. And I'm just going to pretty lightly, I'm not using a lot of force here, because I don't want to change the shape dramatically, but I do want to harden the wire, and I want to flatten it just a little bit. So it just gives them, I think, a little bit more of a handmade feel, a little bit more dimension. So I'm going to go ahead and flatten this second one the same way. That. My favorite way to do this is with my bench block and a hardwood wedge. So I'm using the wedge from my ring clamp. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to roll the wire between the bench block and the wood block. And I'm pressing firmly down on the wood block. So this is doing two things. It's straightening the wire, and it's hardening that wire. So it's going to stiffen it up and make it much more rigid, which is what we want for ear wires. Typically, I would use half hard wire for ear wires, but I don't have half hard in brass, and you know, it's very possible to make ear wires with dead soft wire. I get that question all the time. The answer is yes, you can absolutely use dead soft wire for making ear wires. You're just going to have to work a little bit harder to make sure that it's nice and firmed up and rigid as you're forming your ear wires. So now you can see this is quite a bit straighter. You have a nice clean line, and it's also nice and springy and stiff. It's not as soft as it was. And you can see here how this one is a little bit crooked. So this is the wire that I just straightened with my fingers, and you can see there it's just not quite as straight as the piece that we rolled on the bench block. So again, we're going to roll and just work your way up and down the length of the shaft. Make sure you harden all parts of the wire. So again, this is nice and stiff and springy now. Doesn't want to bend super easily. And that is what we want. You want ear wires to be as stiff as you can possibly make them, because an ear wire is the one part of an earring that's going to take the most abuse. Now the next thing we want to do is just make sure that our ear wires are the same length, and you can see mine are very, very close. I'm going to go ahead and trim those just a bit because I want these to be as close to the same length as possible. So I'm just going to trim the tiniest bit off that edge there. You can see I didn't take much off, but I want to make sure that everything's the same length so that as I begin this next part of the shaping process, that my ear wires come out as symmetrical as possible. So now we want to go ahead and find the side, the face that you want to be the front of your ear wires. And I'm going to go ahead and choose this face here where the wire is coming around and over. So this will be the front loop that's facing forward on the ear wire when it's in the ear. And I'm just going to use my thumbnail right above that wrap as sort of a leverage point, and I'm going to tip that wire slightly forward. So you can see we created just a little bit of an angle there. It's about the same angle that we used on our first bend. So again, make sure you've got the front side of your loop facing forward, thumbnail right above that top wrap, and tip the wire forward just a bit. So there we go. And you should have roughly the same angle on both loops. It's not, you know, they don't have to be absolutely perfect, but you want them pretty close. I'm going to go ahead and tip this one just a little bit more because I made that angle sharper on the first one, or in the second one. So there we go. And now we're going to use our stepped bill making pliers, and again I'm going to use the 8mm step for this shaping process. And the first thing I want to do is we're going to make the curve of the tail. And so I want to make sure that my loop is facing forward and the shaft is coming out toward me. And I'm going to position that wire right between the 9mm and the 8mm step. And we're going to use the 8mm to form this. So we are going to bend this around toward, we're going to point that tip of the wire right at that loop. So we're creating about half, we're going halfway around the mandrel. Not completing a full circle, we're just creating the soft curve that we want on our tail. And the reason we're shaping that tail first is it's just easier. If you shape it after you've shaped the hook, it's a little bit more difficult to get your pliers in there, and you end up sort of running the risk of distorting your hook. So now that we've got our tail shaped, again, I'm going to grasp between the 9mm and 8mm steps. My loop is tipped toward the 9mm step. So this is the front face of the ear wire that you see here. This is the front of the loop, and the back of the loop is facing the 8, it's on the 8mm step side. And then we're just going to bend this around that 8mm step, and I'm just going to keep going until I reach that loop. So the tail wire is touching the loop, and that's what your wire is going to look like so far. Not quite finished, but you can see how we're getting a nice soft curve there on the tail of our ear wire. So again, I'm going to do the same thing, and I have my 8mm step on the forward side. My loop is tipped toward me, and I'm just going to grasp right at the tip of the wire and roll that wire about halfway around the mandrel. So we have this sort of hook shape, looks a little bit like an umbrella hook. And then I'm going to flip my mandrels over. I want the 8mm mandrel in the back, 9mm in the front, and I'm going to grip right above the wrapped loop. My loop is tipped forward. This is the front side of the loop, and it's tipped toward that 9mm step. And then I'm going to push this around the 8mm step all the way until it's up against that loop. See how I did that? So we're going all the way around that 8mm mandrel. And there's our hook. And now at this point, we just want to go ahead and put our ear wires together. We can open these up a little bit. We don't want that quite so tight. And get them, kind of grip them as close as you can together. We want them to be sort of lined up because we're going to trim these tails, and we want our tails to be shaped very similarly. So in order to do that, we want to cut at roughly the same spot. All right, now we're just going to go ahead and trim off the excess tails. And now you see we have our finished ear wires, and we have nice soft curves there at the bottom. This one ended up with a little bit straighter curve. You can see I don't have quite the curve on that. And that's part of the challenge of this style of ear wire. You can't make them quite at the same time like you can with my perfectly matched ear wire trick. These, because we form the loops first, it's a little bit more difficult to get that. Now what you can do if you want to fix that, if that bothers you, you can get back in there with your 8mm step and give it just a little bit more of a curve so that it matches this one a little bit better. See, that already looks a little better. And then the last thing that we're going to do is go ahead and finish hardening these, and we're going to file off the tips of our ear wires to make sure that everything is nice and smooth. Now again, using a chasing hammer is completely optional. I prefer using a chasing hammer, but you can use a nylon hammer if you want to maintain the shape of your wire. You want the round shape and you don't want to distort it at all. I want to go ahead and flare out these ends just a little bit, so I'm going to use a chasing hammer to do that. And I'm using very light strokes there just to flare that tip out the slightest bit. You see that? And then I'm going to shape or just hammer the curve here at the top, and that's just going to lock in that curve. It's going to help it maintain its shape. And I didn't flatten it so much that it changed the width of the wire, but it does give it that sort of distinctly handmade, hand-forged look with that flattened top. I'm going to repeat that here on the second ear wire. Again, lightly flatten. We don't want to hammer too hard. I'm using very light strokes. And then I'm going to flare out this end. And to flare it, notice I'm using a drawing stroke. So as I was hammering up here, I'm not using a drawing stroke because I don't really want to widen these out too much. I want them to stay basically the same width. I just want to flatten them slightly. But here where I'm going to flare out, I am going to go ahead and draw just a little bit, and that's going to pull out that tail and give it a nice sort of flare there at the end. And then the last thing that we're going to do, I'm going to twist this open just like I would a jump ring. And I can get in there with my needle file. And I just open that so that I don't mar my loop at all with my file while I'm smoothing off these edges of the ear wire. We want nice, soft, round corners, so I'm just going to soften that flare into a nice rounded paddle. And then I'm going to go ahead and twist that back into place. And this twisting also helps harden too, so you can do that a couple of times. You can kind of twist it back and forth a little bit, wiggle it back and forth, and that's going to also help harden that wire. Anytime you're using dead soft wire for something structural like an ear wire, you want to take every opportunity you can to harden that up. So use this opportunity here where you need to shape those ends. Go ahead and use that as an opportunity to harden up that wire. Get those nice and soft and round, smooth. We don't want any sharp edges on ear wires. You don't want anything that's going to, you know, cause skin abrasions or irritate the ear. You just want it to slip nice and smoothly into the hole of a pierced earlobe. And again, you can sort of, you know, wiggle this back and forth a little bit, firm that up, harden it, make sure everything's lined up properly. And there you go. Your ear wires are complete. Now I'm just going to go ahead and throw these directly in my tumbler. I'm not going to patina them. You can use liver of sulfur to patina brass and you'll get a nice antique brass look. But I really want to use bright brass for this. So I'm just going to put them directly in my tumbler with some Dawn dish soap. That will also help clean them up, polish them. It'll take off any burrs that are remaining here on the bottom of your ear wires. So there you go. That's it for today. Be sure to come back next week. We're going to make some fun modern stick earrings. These are just a prototype. These are not the finished earrings that we're going to do. I'm waiting on some materials for those, and I'm going to use gemstones, some gemstone beads, and brass wire, and we're going to make these fun modern stick earrings. So stay tuned for that, and until then, go make something beautiful.